Welcome back to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, where we look to crack the code on growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Ortmans, and on today's episode, we're going to dive into a topic that is not consistent and not something we've done, but it's going to be a topic that I think is really interesting. And the topic is this: building a consumer packaged goods company. Now, today's podcast is sponsored by Virtual Causeway. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Website traffic, it's down. Leads, they've dried up. Traditional demand gen, it's kind of dead. AI has changed everything. People now learn about you through LLMs, and you'd actually never know it. Virtual Causeway helps you flip the script. They don't just chase leads, they create conversations with pre-qualified buyers who are ready to talk. You need to break into a new vertical, fill event seats, book quality meetings. Virtual Causeway becomes your team extension. To learn more about them, visit virtualcauseway.com and mention the show for a special rate. Now, my guest today is Kris Phippen. So Kris and I met in probably one of the most unique places you could ever say. We met while we were getting our truck serviced, and we shared a shuttle ride together. Now, we had a great chat. We shared our information. He told me a little bit about his new venture, and what he was doing, and ultimately he was making homemade sauces. I told him that I was like, hey, when you're ready, I want to try it, and let me know when it's saleable. Well, he did, and he drove one to my house, and I think I was part of the early testers, but he's only grown from there. Kris is the founder and CEO of Phlippens, and he began his career in sales. He hit a point in his career where he was like, you know what, I need a change. And he was super passionate about food. He took a leap, created his own sauce, and is now has a full line of sauces in many chains throughout Ontario, Canada. And I think outside of it as well, if I'm not mistaken. We'll learn more. Kris is a proud father, husband, entrepreneur, and he's a mental health advocate. He's sharing his stories with others, and the guy has a heart of gold. Kris, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, all the connections and people I've met on this journey, you being included, has been amazing, and really opened my eyes to just doing something different and taking that leap, and it's been amazing.
So can you maybe tell us a little bit about the world before I ask the big question that I think everybody's going to want to know, listeners, that is, can you share a little bit of a context about your world? Because I think you're working with multiple retailers, but what size retailers or companies are you working with right now with selling Phlippens?
So when the model and the strategy has changed, from day one to today. We had a really big focus on independent retailers, locally in Kitchener-Waterloo was a great avenue to start. It was in our own backyard, born and raised here, and getting the support of a city behind you on a journey is, something I didn't expect, but it happened. We started out, I think, in 2017. Basically, I had come up with the concept, and by early 2018, we incorporated and really dove in. Didn't do anything online. We were basically straight to retail, so from garage to retail. And I don't know if I'm thinking back, and I'm trying to remember if you got a labeled jar or an unlabeled jar.
I actually had both. I had an unlabeled and a labeled.
Wow. Okay. So I think in full transparency, I only did 20 something jars out of my garage before I made all the moves, which we can get into. But to answer your question, small independent retailers was the start. We had an opportunity right before COVID. We had launched out nationally with the Keg restaurant across Canada and the US. COVID quickly kiboshed that for us. So just, that reminder of when you think you made it as an entrepreneur early, something it's bound to make you realize that maybe it's not so easy. So we then went from our transition and pivot during COVID outside of that into Sobeys, and then we got picked up by Loblaws in 2022, I believe. We started out, we're supposed to be in about 30 Zayre stores. I think that turned into, I don't know, 400 Loblaws owned retail stores across Ontario. And then it was the classic case of, scaling too fast, operationally kind of wasn't ready. We had some issues in that time where ingredients had gone up, our cost of goods went up, and just needed to kind of step back from the big box retailers and just strategize around kind of the next play and how do we get back to that. So building a team operationally, we're still hand smoking garlic and onion, and that's been just staying true to the product.
That's awesome.
So
and it's quite the journey. And if you've ever had the chance to try his sauces, the flavor is unreal. So and even to hear the success of like where it launched, and I'm curious, I have more questions there, but let me sort of dive into if we can talk it. So how, if for those of you who've listened, I typically ask the question, hey, what's a successful revenue initiative you've ever led, or what's a challenging initiative you're solving or have solved? And when Kris and I chatted quickly, it was kind of obvious. It was building a consumer packaged goods company. And so I'm excited about this one, not only because, one, building a business is hard, and you even just laid it out, right? Hey, I thought I had something, and all of a sudden the world changed, and then I went into something else, and I sort of adjusted my strategy. But building a business in a passion area is also an interesting one because it's your heart and soul, and you can hear you talk about it in that way. Somebody who's a food lover, I wouldn't say that I'm on the scale of you where I've launched a company and done these things, but I definitely love food. My wife's a chef, a trained chef. I've done some things, but it's interesting to hear from you about how you've gone this journey. And so I think my question, if we can maybe start, is how did you come to the decision to step away from your sales leadership role and actually build a consumer packaged goods company?
That question could be, I feel, an entire week-long series. It is very what's the word I'm looking for? It wouldn't be what you would think how this all started. So I want to just back up a little bit. I was me and my high school sweetheart had our daughter when we were quite young in high school, and I actually left high school before graduating. I guess you would call that dropping out. Without in that time, I think we're around the same age. In that time, not having your diploma was an instant red flag. You couldn't get an interview. I think I've had, I couldn't put a number on it how many jobs I've had from, say 16 years old. I turned 16 out west on the oil rigs with a hockey bag of clothes. I had a one-way train ticket out to Kindersley, Saskatchewan. Just couldn't find the fit at home, right? So anyways, fast forward through a million jobs and finally started to build up a bit of a resume where I was doing event marketing. I had a job with Red Bull when it first came to Canada. And then, as far as on the spectrum of leaving Red Bull and went to an occupational health testing company where I took on a national sales manager role. And, in my head, watching your friends go to college and university, to get the jobs, to take over their family businesses, to do the things. I didn't have those options at that time. So school of black and blue is what my dad always said. And he always told me that, when you're sitting in front of somebody, that piece of paper means nothing because you have a story, and people will respect that story and realize what you've gone through to get in front of them in this time. And I think that would, I took that mentality, forgot about the piece of paper, was able to kind of talk my way through, what I had gone through, and utilize that story to get there. My stepfather, since I was 2 or 3 years old, became kind of, a mentor, somebody that was always taking time to help advance my career, and in the same time, learning what I need to do in order to make up for the things I didn't have, whether that was, on the education side or the business side of things, and literally school of black and blue. In 2017, my stepdad, just 2 weeks after his 60th birthday, we tragically lost him. He went up north on a Friday. We got a call on a Sunday, and just that quickly life changed, and it just really became a life's too short moment for me. I was traveling 3 weeks a month in the sales role all over Canada, missing out on family and birthdays and, friends and family and the things that matter. And I think from that moment on, just, there wasn't a goodbye. I knew something was happening with him, and had a chance to, have those conversations with such an important person in my life. And just suddenly it's just gone. And, I think back to me and him, at the cottage, at the smoker, having conversations, building our bond as I got through kind of that, BS young stage of my life, and got a career, and saw that he was so proud of me taking on this role and traveling. And I just thought that's what I needed to do. I was keeping up with my friends and everybody else, and it was the money that mattered. But, sitting in that airport on a Sunday, looking around you at, miserable other people just drowning in the Air Canada lounge, drinking free rye, wasn't gonna work for me. And, to answer the question, I literally was just in the garage. It was kind of my grieving process. I spent a lot of time smoking meat, and it became this odd connection with my smoker. It's a lot of time, very, 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 very weird thing to say, but at the same time, it just became kind of therapeutic. I was learning something new. I always had the passion became, smoking meat, and learning the art of, of barbecue, I guess. All the products that I was seeing out there just were, liquid smoke, just generic, barbecue sauce type products. And I just thought to myself, what if I just went to the market and grabbed some veggies and threw them on the smoker, and made a sauce that was hand smoked as opposed to adding liquid smoke. And I did that. And like I said at the start, I think I bought, 20 something mason jars. I came up with a recipe, and honest to God truth, I quit my job. I never got back on a plane. I decided to put my face on the jar as a logo to be able to build some human connection to the product. Didn't call it barbecue sauce. I called it a smoked sauce. And it was just something crazy and unique and different. And I decided in that moment, went inside, told my partner at the time that I was quitting my job and starting a sauce business. And that's literally how it started.
It's unreal. The connect. I mean, when you grieve and you get different perspective, it can certainly change the way you think about what you're doing in your life and etc. There's lots of stories that I've heard that come in that respect. But there's an interesting component here. You had a connection to the smoker. Now, there is like maybe a sort of a I don't know if it's a yes or no. Have you ever been in consumer packaged goods or in the retail space before?
No,
Okay.
just as like as a rapper with Red Bull, just on the sales side of stuff, but from anything outside of that, no.
So how do you then, because this is the one that I'm fascinated with. Look, I figured something out. I really like this. I think somebody else can enjoy it. How do you then go, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take it to market. I'm going to do all the things. What's the learnings and what are some of the things you had to endure just to get that first number of jars into the hands of not only retailers, but customers?
Well, a lot of that started just like, how you and I met. And it was friends, family, and a network that I knew I had built over time. And, it was as simple as, what, I refused to just keep doing these things that were making me miserable. And it didn't necessarily have to be a sauce. And I didn't know, I knew that Phlippens as a whole would be something. I didn't know what, but the sauce was something in my head that was okay. I'm a food guy. I know this tastes good. I know that I have a network of people that would, if it was 50 jars, it doesn't really matter. It was that moment where I had to make a decision that my family and my time and what I was doing with my life, knowing that, tomorrow I could trip on the stairs and it would be all over. So what can I do in this moment? And that's what it was. And it was came up with the product, you know, talked to a couple people in town, just, where could I possibly get this made? Realizing that nobody else wants to give me those answers. So go figure it out. So I figured it out. I got a sample made. I did 70 jars, I think, on a, like a test run with no labels. And then that was October, early November. And then by mid-November, those 70 jars had sold out in maybe 2.5 or 3 days unlabeled. And it was just, hey, I got this sauce. It was, friends would buy, 5 jars at a time or something, just to kind of help things, not thinking I was doing anything with this, but the product was just good and they loved it and wanted more. I booked another run in for November and just went and picked them up. And from the co-packer to my first retail store was Victoria Street Market. And I think I only had one SKU. We were in a 6-pack. And I think my first order was for 5 cases. They gave me a great display there. I sampled that first weekend and literally just never took the product out of my truck. I just went to every store, told them who I was if I didn't know them already, and basically I'd emptied that out, and we sold out in 2 days with, I think we had 35 retailers in our first month.
So when you went to those retailers, was it quite literally you walked in and said, "Hey, here's who I am. This is my sauce. Could you supply? Could you put it up?" Was it the small retailers or the big retailer? Like, how did that go? Because my thought process here is, in order to get into a national chain, you're going to have some level of a contract, and here's where we're going to go. There's an end cap. I mean, my relationship with like LG and Best Buy comes into play. Like, okay, you got to get it. Your SKU has to be announced, and we got to have a cost per unit, and we have to have it up market, and blah blah blah. So, how did you get those first ones? Was it quite literally walk in, talk to the manager, say, "Hey, could you help me out?"
Yeah. What I would do is I would take a bit of my experience in the past, just, on the sales side, but it's, quick intro. Don't want to take up your time, leaving this with you and let me know. And oftentimes I wouldn't have left the store yet or the parking lot where a jar was cracked or sampled, or just, hey, we got to start to focus on local a bit more. And that's where that kind of started out. It was just walking in, product, either have a bite now or later, and it was just, it caught fire. I mean, it was the talk of the town very quickly. And when one store has it, the next guy needs it, and the next guy needs it. And it's funny, I mean, lots of the stores are competing with each other for the next best thing. And like I said, I think we went from 30 retailers to 60 to 100, and just doubled, tripled year after year until the keg came. And then kind of that game changed a little bit, where it's it's a national listing, we're going across the border, we need to find a distributor. We were lucky there, we got fast tracked into Cisco, which was like, it's the biggest restaurant food supplier in North America. And yeah, it took off.
So how did the keg thing? Could you, without sharing all the details, but how did you get into the keg? The keg is, if you're from North America, like in Canada, Keg's a pretty fancy restaurant. In the US, there's lots of steak places. But how did you get how did the keg opportunity come up?
So what had happened was, my aunt and uncle were friends with the owners of the keg in Cambridge. We were at a cottage together. They loved the product. We were drinking Flippin' Caesars, and then it ended up in an appetizer. It ended up on the main course. It ended up on the table. And I was just watching these guys, like, just, dusting the jar. Like, I think there was 2 jars that got finished on a Friday night. And I just kind of, I was like, what is this? Flipping crack in a jar, basically. And he said, I got a guy I want to give this to. And, it was one of those times where, we kind of hit like a slow period, and you start to question things, right? It was a huge snowstorm. It was like, hey, can you drop some samples off in Cambridge? I had, less than a quarter tank of gas. It was a blizzard. I was like, I'm not going to do this right now. Something pushed me. I went, I dropped it. And by the next Wednesday, I had a call from the culinary director of the keg that just said, I've been staring at this jar for a few days, and I need to know more. And so I went and met with him down at the keg. He said, I got some ideas. It was downtown Toronto. And I think with 4 days, he built a feature around the sauce. And what they loved about the sauce is the keg makes about 90% of their sauces and dips and what have you in-house. The fact that it was hand smoked, and the fact that we brought out these levels of flavor that they would never take time to do or pay somebody to do, through the keg. It was hours or days, whatever, of smoking to get those depths of flavor. He said it was completely unique to them. And I think within 2 weeks, I had a PO from the keg. That continued. We got listed with Cisco. That grew. POs were coming. The feature was getting bigger and bigger. We ended up being the second biggest feature in the keg, behind steak and lobster. And I went and met with them again. Yes, 100%. This will be a full-time menu item. Congratulations. We're ready to, kind of roll this out and be on our menu full time. So we'll need you to, supply and keep up. And that was all fine. And 2 weeks after that, COVID hit. All the keg restaurants shut down. Cisco asked me to buy back about $40,000 worth of inventory because they couldn't do anything with it. And, leads into this conversation, which is probably where that conflict came of, having all this product sitting there. Co-packer was closed down, couldn't bottle more product. And then the pivot into COVID, right? And I think that kind of fits this conversation as far as where we had to make a decision quickly to keep rolling.
So how did that? I mean, it's amazing that you got there, and like if you haven't tried his sauce and put it in a Caesar, you're doing yourself a disservice. Like, go and try it. It is unreal. So The question that I think I have now is, so you now have to buy all this stuff back. You have this product. What does the conversation sound like for the pivot? How did you then look at the challenge in front of you and go, all right, my next move is here? How did that even come to play?
It was a really weird pivot because of the fact that I just, we had continued success with all the retailers. The world was just hit that unknown, right? Where the
Mm,
keg says, okay, like I had quickly used that money for, probably another podcast, but I needed to use that money to further myself. And then all of a sudden, that PO had dwindled out, and the co-packer shut down, the keg shut down, and all the retailers, they weren't having customers. And so instantly I just thought, how do I get the product back? Where I told the keg, no, there's no chance I can buy this product back, and I won't be. So we'll have to, get it on the menu when this thing's over, or
mhm.
leave it sit and let me, try and figure something out. And the pivot happened where I just said, um, what's every other brand doing right now? And when they're relying on retail, like we had some online sales, but it wasn't my focus. And so when everything stops, yet it's either over or we figure something out. And the pivot was to be the first local delivery curate your own box. We called it the Phippen family box, and we were the first local. I think we reached out to about 25 or 30 other local brands, and you could go on, support local, curate these boxes, and then we would deliver the boxes throughout COVID. And so not even a week in of starting that, I was able to buy all the product back from the keg, because now I needed that product to fulfill the orders that were coming in for these boxes. And we were, not only were we the Phippen family box with the face and everything on the boxes, but we were able to carry a lot of other brands that maybe either didn't have the idea or didn't know how to pivot, or what they were going to do. And that's some pretty big brands now that I look back at, right? Like Crafty Ramen and For All Ice Cream, and we had a cheese company. We had, it's just all these kind of essentials, but they're all local, independently owned brands. And that time, everybody wanted to support that. So we were
That's
doing
all.
like 150 boxes like every 24 hours.
Wow. That's all. I mean, and there was a big push um, for the support local, and I think there still is, right? Like, if you're ever around Kitchener Waterloo, you will see this man's face on a sticker somewhere on a sign, likely in the Tim Hortons drive-through, but you'll see it because there's a big supporting fan base from you. If I can kind of fast forward a little bit, because now that you've got this going, is this the push where you went to creating your own online presence? Is that where, because you went from retail, now you're supporting local. Where did the online presence start to show up?
Are you referring more to the journey and the conversations that we're having, or?
No, sorry, because now you're starting to you now have I think it's Shopify. I think you built on Shopify, if I'm not mistaken. So now you have this online, your ability to buy, your family pack online, and you can do those things. Where does that part of the journey come in play?
So we had that from day one. It just wasn't the focus. And I
Okay.
think normally when people are starting a consumer packaged goods business, you would push it online first, grow that demand there, and then start to hit the retailers. I just knew more of the retail game than I did the online game. Shipping is crazy expensive, and in that time it was like, Canada Post or bust, because
Right.
you don't have the volumes to get any shipping discounts. You don't have um, you don't have the money to play with, and people haven't had the product, and they're not going to pay X amount of dollars to get this heavy glass dense, product delivered. But we've always had online sales. It just wasn't the main focus. Retail has been the focus. There's a lot more margin, obviously, online. When you're going to retail, you can do so much yourself, and then it's, a broker to do your sales, then you're in distribution to get the product there, and then you're a co-packer, and then, whatever is left over is quite frankly, your time smoking onions and garlic, if that's what you're doing. Yeah. So it gets challenging, but I think just going down all these roads, not knowing at the start, people, a normal person would do research and look at the market. And, why would I do that? For me, it was like, this is my journey. It's my product. I don't sit in any category. I don't call it a barbecue sauce. I don't call it a hot sauce. We have Phlippens, and we have a spicy version of Phlippens. We have a sweet with heat version of Phlippens, and somehow, some way, we have the Phippen jerk. And it's interesting to look back at it now. It's like, well, I don't, it's the most saturated consumer packaged goods product you could have. There's a zillion sauces. Every sauce comes with a story. I think throughout this journey, at the very start was, hey, look at me, we're in this store. Hey, we're in this many stores. Well, that's all great, and it's growth, and it shows that you have, retail locations where you can physically buy the product. But, are the stores reordering the product? Is it just sitting on a shelf collecting dusts, in the bottom corner? But, we were really lucky. We built amazing relationships and stood for something. And the standing for something is that we are relatable to the independent store owners that started that store or took it over from their parents and struggled through the same things that I struggle with as an entrepreneur or a business owner. And so the relatability piece, is huge. And it's always been a big part of Phlippens. And I've just been very open and vulnerable about the journey and, the different roads I've had to take to learn, come back, learn, come back. I think if you don't quit, you get to the same end, but one road is going to be windy and bumpy and shitty, and the other road's going to be nice and smooth, and everything falls into place. And if you got that, then that's great, but that's not the journey I'm on. And, that's not my life. It's funny because the jars, the brand, and me all intermingle because it's my story, it's my face, it's my name, and I am those products. Like I have that original, everything versatile mode, and then I can have my sweet but a bit spicy. I can be spicy and I can be a flippin' jerk. So I mean, you look at those things and it all kind of just fits. And the challenge is not just being another sauce and advocating for things that are important in this world, and it's more about purpose than it is product.
So how did you go from, if I mean, like, what are some of the lessons learned? You went from in your garage. I remember you showing me your hand. You're like, dude, my hands smell like smoke. Like my whole garage smells like smoke. I got onions and garlic all the time. What were the lessons learned of going from you building and establishing those jars yourself, hand jarring them? Now you've got to go and like do it en masse. What's that lesson learned, and what are the ahas going from point A to point B?
Well, I mean, the first thing is you can't do it all, right? You can't do everything. And when you're first starting, you're the social media, and 8 years in, and we're still managing those things, right? It's your face. People want to see you. They don't want to, it's just there's yeah. To get to your question, the aha is, I don't know, you have options at that point, right? And you could figure out how to manufacture the product yourself. We could have kept going out of the garage and risked like I wouldn't have been able to do anything. I wouldn't have been able to go to retail. I wouldn't have been able to get some of these, locations or what have you without the proper, facility to back it up. And what's weird about that is you spend a lot of money getting testing. You spend a lot of money on third party and nutritionals and make sure that what's in your jar is true. And when COVID happened, they like opened the floodgates for you to just be able to do it in your own kitchen, and nobody questioned that, right? And so all of a sudden mason jars started showing up, and I said, like, shit, if I could have done that, you're making 90% profit on your bottle, and sure, that would have been great, but I knew that we were going to scale, and to scale you need the right partnerships in a co-packer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that you're going to get many Health Canada people coming in to look at your garage and be like, yeah, this is sanitary, we're good to sell it. So I mean, there's an obvious, if you want to scale, you're going to have to find that. How hard was it to find that bottler or that company to work with that can actually do it, or the co-packer? How hard was that?
Different for everybody, but it was one phone call. It was
Wow.
one phone call. I went, he said he could do it, and I said, let's do it. It was the closest to my place. Another place in Kitchener was using them, and I've been there ever since.
Nice. So now that you're in there, how much of you, because you said you can't do it all. So is there a point where you go, look, there's this, I don't know if you ever heard this notion of like, you have to give up your Legos in order to get more, right? So if you're doing everything, you got to give up your Legos to get more. Was it hard to sort of give up the Legos to say, look, somebody else is going to take my recipe, they're going to work it, they're going to bottle it, because I have to work on other things. Was that a hard thing to do? Was that an easy thing to do?
I think, like, for me, it was, on the back of a piece of paper, here's my recipe, right? It wasn't like, this is grandma's, 1,000-year-old smoked sauce recipe that I need to hold on to dear to my life. The process to begin with, nobody would ever do, right? You'd be an insane person to think that you're going to hand smoke every clove of garlic and every piece of onion, but that's what we do. And for all the warnings ahead of time was just, it's going to bottleneck you. You gotta, just add a couple drops of liquid smoke and you can get rid of all these issues. But, as I think when you start to realize that you can, it's like, yeah, it's nerve wracking. And you're also looking at somebody that, holds pride into your product and know that, your success is their success and what they're doing for you. And, it all kind of works together, and it really does become almost like a partnership when you're using a third party to do it. And I mean, people could say, well, it's not small batch anymore. It's not handcrafted. Well, sure, it's handcrafted by 8 people instead of 1 now, right? My hands are touching every piece of garlic and every piece of onion that's in the product still to this day. And, the issue becomes, we're sitting at, local ingredients, handcrafted, all those types of things come into play. And then you get questioned, a jar of Phlippens, just say wherever it is in the store, if you're up beside, Heinz bottle of barbecue sauce for 99 cents. It's a tough one. We're not making the product for 25 cents or 50 cents, right?
Right.
And to show that value and to show, what we're doing, that's been the biggest challenge, is justifying price to product. If you have it, if you've had it, you'd pay 20 for it.
Yeah, I agree. And the way you've brought the sauces and the flavors together, and kudos to you, because is it easy to say, and you didn't take the easy way out, if from what I'm hearing, right? Well, it's just, Kris, it's easy. Just put a couple of drops of liquid smoke and you don't have to do this. We can speed it up. But that goes away from your core values and how you establish this to be that. So kudos to you for making sure that, look, this is what I built. I don't want to change the recipe for those people that have been with me from the beginning and go, Kris, like this sauce, what happened to it? So there's a values component to you. And I know you're so rooted in your values and your beliefs and making sure that people have trust. Because I think what I've got to know about you is it feels like trust is at the top of your scale. And I want to make sure that people trust what I say, trust that, that the actions I'm doing, but also trust that when you buy that sauce, it tastes exactly the same as the first time you had it, if not tastes even better because you're putting it in new things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it does. There's challenges where I think the hard part about that co-pack piece is that at the end of the day, you're just putting all your trust into that. And if it was like we've had times for the sweet heat, for example, where we got a batch of peppers, that gradually got hotter over time. So an Ontario, ghost pepper one day is this. The next time we bottled, I tasted it and was like, "Oh my god, this is too hot." What happened? And it's like, well, these peppers were, from this farm, and they were, this much hotter. It's like a pepper is not a pepper,
right?
You got to know. And it's been interesting because you're kind of at the mercy of your, local produce, I guess, too, right? Where you're trying to keep it the same, and it's that piece becomes a little challenging, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to the grocery store today and buy pick a ghost pepper, jalapeno, anything. You go, oh, I taste one, it's sweet, but the next one, what just happened? It's all the way that it comes to be, but definitely a challenge. I realize the timing, we're a little over 40 minutes, and I don't want to keep you too long, because I think I could ask you a lot more questions, but there's something that I try to ask everybody, and it's this: everybody likes new, nobody likes different, and when you do both at the same time, it can cause either friction or uncertainty. And so for somebody thinking about, hey, look, I think I want to take Kris's journey. I've got a passion. I've got something. I'm going to start my own consumer package good. What are a couple of the like ahas or the lessons learned that you would tell somebody else who's starting their own journey? Be aware of these things. What would those be aware of these things be?
Could be an episode. I truly, for me and for my experience, it is being confident in what you're doing. You can't please everybody, right? So for an example, I launched the original. Well, it should be spicier, it should be sweeter. Oh, you should add this. Well, like, I just put everything into this one jar, and now your opinion is going to make me second guess what took me all this courage to put out. And what you have to realize is that when I say flippin' hot, that doesn't mean we're comparable to, Joe's ass burning, sauce. We're like, we're not. And so for somebody to say, well, it's not hot enough. Well, not hot enough for what? And compared to what? This is flipping hot. That's not anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think as I've gone down the road more and separated from the pack to stay true to what I put in that jar, what I believe in, and what I think is relatable to everybody else. And that truth and the transparency and the vulnerability of my journey is what has made Phlippens successful.
I think
everybody has an opinion. Everybody's going to tell you not to do something. The amount of people that told me not to put my face on the jar, because I'm not Paul Newman. I'm not famous. I'm just Kris. But I'm not hiding behind a pig, a chicken, and a cow. I'm not hiding behind a logo that isn't me, because it's not. This is me, and this is my product. And I think when your blinders are on, you stay clear on your own path, you have to block the noise. And it's not easy, especially in a market like this, because Carl's sauce can come out tomorrow and you have a story too, and people like you and they'll buy it.
Well, fair to say, Kris, I'm not touching the sauces. You're that you got no competition from me, but there's interesting lessons learned there, right? It sounds like stay confident in it. I mean, there's some questions that we probably didn't get to, but I know we're going to run out of time, and you've got lots of things to do for today. So, Kris, for those people that have listened and said, hey, you know what, I'd like to learn more, where could people find you? Where's the best place to go?
So Phlippens.com, or check out our social pages, our Instagram. It's just Phlippens. We're on Facebook as well, LinkedIn.
Nice. Kris, you're somebody that I've admired for since our first conversation. I've admired you. Every time we chat, I leave a little bit more energy. You're incredibly genuine and you walk the talk. You're transparent, you're open. And at the end of the day, you're real. You also keep creating amazing new sauces, which isn't good for my product or for my pocketbook. But if you haven't tried his sauces and you have access to them, try them. If you're not following him, give them and also Kris a follow. You'll be happy you do. Thank you for being and doing this with me today, Kris. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it very much.
So that's going to wrap up another episode of the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast. Obviously, want to thank Kris for sharing these incredibly invaluable insights. Hopefully, if you're building your own CPG company, these are some strategies you can put into action. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl with Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn obstacles into opportunities. Thank you for investing your time today with us, and I'll see you in the next episode.